Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove, and today we're going to be talking about how to de-escalate confrontations. Now, conflicts are unavoidable, whether it's leadership, whether it's workplaces, whether it's even personal relationships. We all face these moments in which tensions rise, misunderstandings happen, and emotions take over. But the real difference between a conversation that leads to a resolution and one that leads to regret is not necessarily what we do, but how we do it. And it's how we handle these moments. And when a situation starts to escalate, we have this choice. We can either let it spiral out of control as we lose control, or we can take responsibility for guiding it to a more productive outcome. And the way that we manage ourselves during these moments determine whether or not that conversation can either build some trust or break the trust that's there. Now, as a quick story, when it comes to handling these types of escalating moments of confrontation, there's a lot of different ones that I was trying to sift through for this podcast, but one that I feel like is kind of like a peak moment wasn't in a workplace. It was actually when our church was handing out gifts to people who were homeless, and we just had these simple like winter bags to support them during the cold season. And we were handing out our very last bag, and right when we were about to wrap up, everyone had already walked to the car, and it was just me left in the street as I was saying bye to one more person. And then this guy came up. His name was Yusef, and he was probably like, I don't know, it felt like 7 feet tall. He's one of the tallest guys I've ever met. And as he came up, he looks and smells like he's inebriated. And he says, "Hey, can I get one?" And I said, "Well, we just ran out, gave the last one away, but I have this Bible left that we're also giving out. You can take a free Bible." And he looks at me, looks down at the Bible, and smacks it out of my hand and says, "Man, get that out of my face!" And is clearly upset and angry, and the tensions just skyrocket immediately. And everyone had already went back to the car. Now it's just me. It's just me in front of Yusef, this complete stranger at the time that I've never met before, and he's went from 0 to 100, and it seems like he's really emotional and angry. Now, to give a quick summary of what happened, the very first thing I said was something really simple, and I said, "Do you not like the Bible?" I didn't raise my emotion. I didn't act. There's no like emotional reaction. It was just very calm, and I just followed up with his response with kind of like a reasonable question that didn't really have the same energy as him. It was just still calm. And to make that long story short, it ended with him crying on my shoulder. I was literally on my tippy toes saying like, there. And he was so grateful. And I was able to de-escalate this confrontation completely to where even though he's smacking a Bible out of my hands and yelling at me at the beginning, by the end of it, he tells me that if I ever need anybody out on the streets, that he's got my back. So Yusuf is out there fighting for me, not against me. And it's what I use in that conversation is the same method I use for all these other confrontations I've experienced over the years, whether it was in sales, whether it was in workplaces, or even volunteers, or etc. These tips can really help you to de-escalate the emotional highs of confrontation. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not perfect. I've made plenty of mistakes, and that a lot of what we're talking about today is after years of doing it the wrong way. And so I hope that this is helpful for you. As we break down 5 key strategies, I really hope that this will help you in keeping control of these tough conversations, to de-escalate those high emotional moments and create a space for resolution instead of conflict. So here are 5 practical ways to de-escalate those confrontations and take control of the conversation in a productive way. Number 1 is keep control of the conversation by keeping control of your own emotions. See, the only thing that you have full control over in a confrontation is yourself. And if you allow your emotions to dictate your reaction, you're giving up control of the conversation before it even starts. You are, in a sense, handing over the conversation to the person that is bringing it to you, and you're just adding more fuel to the fire. The more emotionally charged you are, the harder it is to think clearly, the harder it is to listen effectively, the harder it is to guide the conversation in a more productive direction. People feed off of the energy that you give, and if you meet intensity with more intensity, the situation will only escalate. This is not the time to be an authority figure and try to just power move this person down back into submission. That even if you are able to calm that person right now, it's only going to harbor whatever negative things that they're feeling, and now you're going to be if the confrontation wasn't about you and it was about someone else, well, now you're going to just be the focal point, the wedge, and you're on their side. So again, that's not going to be really effective. The more but if you stay calm and measured and intentional with your words, with your tone, again, it's not always what you say, but how you say it. You're able to set the tone for the conversation. Your ability to control your own emotions determines whether the conversation is able to stay on track or turns into a battleground. So if you feel yourself getting overwhelmed in the moment, you need to take a slow breath before speaking. You need to pause. You need to really think before you just start spouting out. And if you need to be able to have this moment where you can regain control and composure and choose a response that keeps the conversation from spiraling out of control. Now, if it's a really heated emotional spot, there's nothing wrong with taking a pause and saying like, hey, look, this seems like a pretty intense conversation. Let's take a moment to breathe and calm down so that we can come back when we're a little more calm. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, but with that, you do need to set a time in which you will reconvene. So make it a specific. Don't say, let's talk about just talk about this later. But whether it's, hey, let's talk about this at lunch, or let's talk about this at the end of the day, or let's talk about it tomorrow morning. Like, just determine a reasonable length of time, but give a deadline if you ever are going to have to pause. Number 2, lead with questions that fill in the story gaps to show some empathy. See, one of the biggest mistakes that people make in confrontation is assuming that they already understand the full picture. I know this isn't necessarily like a Christian biblical learning podcast, but there's a proverb that says that everybody seems right until the cross-examination is done. And so, especially when tensions are high, people often jump to conclusions based off of just one perspective. And that's exactly what leads to miscommunication and defensiveness. So there's two sides of this coin. One, the person that is bringing you their side of the story, if it's a confrontation with somebody else, you don't just assume that the other person is wrong. What I have found, again, this is just take it with a grain of salt, the more crazy the accusation, the less likely I found it to be accurate. Does that make sense? And so often it is something that's taken out of context, something that was misunderstood. And when I hear the other person's side, I was like, oh, well, this seems like a really simple fix. This seems like a really simple misunderstanding, but it's just blown out of proportions. The other side of this is that the person that's bringing you the problem, they might even just have their one side of the story. Regardless, instead of assuming, lead with questions that help you gather more information. You don't want to tackle this confrontation or even attempt to de-escalate it if you don't even understand what's going on. You need to show that you genuinely care about the other person's perspective, and you need to ask questions like, can you help me understand what led to this? Or something like, what were you feeling when this happened? When they said this to you, or when they brought this up, what was a before and after? What was it that you were feeling? And these types of questions not only help you to get a clearer picture, but they also show the other person that you're not just trying to win the argument. You're trying to understand. And keep in mind that you should approach confrontations with curiosity instead of assumption. The more that you let someone share their perspective, the less defensive they'll end up being in the end, because they feel like they're actually being heard. And there's even sometimes where people just share everything they say and say, after talking now, I realize that this isn't even something that I need to bring up. And it helps even just kind of de-escalate them being able to have a place to share. But on top of all that, you want to keep in mind that the other person may not know how to properly articulate what they're feeling. Maybe something was said inappropriately, or something did happen where it caused this emotional thing. But you should ask with, again, you need to really approach certain situations with care. Ask with intention and curiosity and understanding, not with an assumptive tone or a defensive tone. You might want to say things. So when they said this, do you know what about it made you feel this way? Why do you understand why they said it this way that made you feel such a emotional reaction? Hey listeners, today I'm reaching out for your support to keep our journey of innovative Christian leadership alive. Every week we dive into territories of faith-based leadership because of the contributions made by people who believe in this mission. Whether you want to help us by becoming a monthly supporter or by submitting a one-time donation, you help fuel our discussions on authentic and practical leadership. Your generosity allows us to help other leaders just like yourself harness their creativity for the greater good of our communities and beyond. As a monthly supporter, you can submit questions and comments to be shared on the show each week, and you'll also get weekly shout-outs on air for being a member. And if you become a super supporter, you will receive a monthly free product from our online store. To support us, please visit homerhargrove.com and look for the support section. It's quick, it's easy, and every bit of it helps us to make greater impact to Christian leadership. Thank you for being a part of our mission. Now, let's get back to today's episode. Again, you want to try to say it in an articulate way, but even being able to really be curious about what was it that made you so mad about it. Try to get down to it. And again, don't ask in a way that is, well, why would that make you mad? That's gonna re-escalate things. You might want to ask it in a more curious tone. Wow, okay, I understand what you're saying. So, with that being said, what do you think made it feel so hurtful when they said it like that? And then they can process those emotions as they're talking about it. Now, number 3, confirm their feelings and by repeating back what you understand. So again, we're talking about people being able to have a place where they're heard. That alone will help de-escalate. But when emotions are high, one of the simplest and most effective ways to de-escalate that conversation is by even repeating back what you believe that they're saying. They want to to be able to clarify that you do quite in fact understand what they're saying. This doesn't mean that you have to agree, but it just means that you're acknowledging their feelings and making sure that you understand them correctly. For example, instead of saying, I get it, but y'all still work together. Try saying something like, so I hear what you're saying is that you felt dismissed when they didn't check in earlier about this. Does that sound right? Or you felt like when they said this, it had an undertone of that. Am I hearing that right? You're trying to you're confirming what it is that they're trying to express. And it gives the other person a chance to clarify anything that you may have misunderstood. Again, when emotions are high, we sometimes don't know how to say it just right. And so it not only helps them to feel validated, but it helps to clarify the situation. And all of this lowers the need for them to fight for their point because they're being understood. Again, we're talking about instead of just rushing in to defend yourself or someone else's actions, you want to take a moment to confirm what it is that they're trying to express. When people feel heard, they're more likely to calm down and have that productive conversation. But on top of all that, there's been plenty of times where someone has come in hot and I'm like, oh, dang, like what's going on? And as I confirm, so are you mad about this? Or what I'm hearing is that you're saying this. There's been times like, no, I'm not even mad about that. It's the fact that they did this. And I was like, oh, when you came in at first, I thought something completely opposite. And so it can really help you to, again, funnel in what the solutions could possibly be, which leads us to number 4, focus on solutions and include this person into the process. So this is the idea that confrontations often escalate because people feel like they're being talked at instead of being included in this resolution. And if someone is upset, dictating the next steps without their input can either make them feel dismissed. They might wonder if there was ever a resolution, or if there was ever actions behind something they feel like should have been done. Even if you have the best intentions, if you just say someone, I'll handle it, that's great and all, But if you, instead of just presenting a solution, imagine involving them in finding that kind of solution by asking something like, so what do you think would be a reasonable way to move forward? And the key word is reasonable. How could we make this wrong right? How can we work together to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And when people are a part of that solution, they're far more likely to be open to change rather than feeling like something was forced on them or for them. It helps them to feel like a product of the solution themselves, a catalyst for making wrong things right. And of course, not every request is reasonable. If their response is like, "Well, I think they need to be fired," well, maybe that is not the reasonable solution. Like, "Hey, I hear you." You can just respond by saying like, "I hear you. I know that you're really upset about this, and I understand why, but we can't just fire them. So what is something a little more reasonable? How can we move this forward?" And maybe not every solution is possible, but that's where that leadership and discernment comes in from your part. If a suggestion doesn't align with the bigger picture, you should explain why and offer some fair alternatives. The goal isn't just to end the confrontation, it's about to resolve it in a way that makes sense for everyone involved. We should try to always look for a way to bring even like both sides into the solution. When people feel like their voice matters in the outcome, they're more likely to commit to that resolution instead of just resisting. And so, especially if it's with somebody else, saying like, "Do you think that this would be good for us to bring this person in so we can all clear the air and get this out?" And they may say like, "Yes, I think they should know." And even just being able to have that conversation, it will have that space for you to resolve it, even just if it's between two people. Sometimes it's not always a systematic solution. Sometimes it's just two people who had a misunderstanding, or there's two people where on a normal day, what they said or what they did would have been fine, not a big deal. But on this specific day, maybe one of them had a really bad day. Maybe they even something at home caused them to be really upset. Maybe they have a loved one in the hospital to where they're extra sensitive or emotional, and that's fine. We should just be able to understand that our lives are beyond our workplaces, and our lives also go into our workplaces. We can't always just separate these places, and we are emotional beings, and we should take into consideration that there's times where we have a bad day. And if we don't acknowledge this emotional state of our normal lives as people, as human beings, and just expect people to be drones at a workplace, we're not going to really get very far. And that leads us to our last point, which is discern whether emotions need to calm down before moving forward. Not every confrontation needs to be solved immediately on the spot. Sometimes people are too upset to think clearly, and trying to push them forward in those moments can actually do more harm than good. And part of de-escalation is even knowing when to take a step back and assess whether a resolution is even possible at this moment. I've seen over the last 15 years of ministry and work, I've seen people make some really unexpected decisions when they're in an emotional state. And most of the time, they were feeling an emotional confrontation happen. And when there was what seemed like even a reasonable solution presented or reasonable reconciliation, because they were so emotional in the moment, they left completely. They quit. They I don't want to say overreacted, but they're acting in a moment of emotional defense, and so they're trying to protect themselves, and they feel desperate. It's like that fight or flight mode. And so if you try to force somebody into that moment when they're literally emotionally engaged in the fight or flight, you may lose a great employee because they were not only just having a bad day, but they were having a bad day and then this happened. And when it could have all been avoided by just saying, "Hey, I hear you." Maybe the best thing we should do is take a moment, take a pause, and like I said at the beginning, let's come back to this at the end of the day. Let's take a moment to gather ourselves and even acknowledge like this is a big deal. I see that it is a big deal. I see that it's important to you, and I want to give some time to really process and think about this so that we can come to a good resolution, a good solution that you feel good about, and really try to discern whether of when that needs to happen. Ask yourself, is this conversation moving towards a solution, or are the emotions getting in the way? Is it escalating? Even though I'm checking off all these boxes, I'm doing all the right things, but it doesn't seem to be working. It even feels like it's getting worse. If it's the latter, it might be best to take that break and come back to this discussion later. But you need to put a deadline on it. You could say something, I want us actually to work through this, but I don't think it's the right space to do it right now. Can we talk about this at this time? Let's just have moments to think more clearly. And at the same time, consider that the reality that some conflicts won't always have a perfect solution. Not every disagreement will end with both parties satisfied. And that's okay. Not everything is a win-win-win. It's part of leadership is knowing when to even let go of trying to force that in agreement and move forward as best as possible, even if there's not the perfect solution. Before continuing a confrontation, check if these emotions are clouding the ability to make progress. If the conversation is going in circles, you might need to just step away and come back when it's better chance of resolution. And all that to say too, there's some times where, depending on your ability to discern, there's certain situations to where no matter what you say, if a person is really upset or agitated, emotional, etc., no matter what you say to try to fix it will not satisfy unless it's the one thing that they want. And in those moments, if that one thing that they want is unreasonable, you just have to know that that's part of leadership is knowing the right, having to make the tough decisions. And there's certain moments where it's just, you have to just kind of take the L and accept, like, okay, well, I really want you to be a part of our team. I really value you. But if this is the only solution is by leaving, or if this person is fired and we're not going to do that, I'm really sorry. I want to help you and make this work. But before you make any big decision, can we talk about this again tomorrow? Again, you can make it clear that you want to resolve things, but we can't do that, or etc. But you don't have to keep going in circles, but even give that like kind of last chance. Like, can we talk about this again tomorrow in the morning? Let's give some time to really think about it and try to, again, give opportunity even when it seems like all is lost. Now, let's recap with these 5 takeaways. The 5 key points that we talked about today. We talked about, number 1, keep control of the conversation by keeping control of your emotions. Stay calm, stay measured, and be intentional in your response. We talked about leading with questions that fill in these story gaps and also show empathy. We talked about asking before assuming, and you'll learn more and you'll lower defensiveness. Number 3, we talked about confirming their feelings by repeating back what you understand, what you heard them say, and we know that people calm down when they feel heard and understood. And number 4, we talked about focus on solutions and include the person in the process. Let them be a part of the resolution so that they can feel the value within the solution. And number 5, discern whether emotions need to calm down before moving forward. Sometimes the best thing to do is pause and revisit later. All this to say that de-escalating conflict isn't about avoiding hard conversations. It's about handling them in a way that leads to clarity instead of chaos. And when you lead with self-control, curiosity, and you focus on that resolution, you're able to create conversations that build trust rather than breaking that trust down. The next time that you find yourself in this kind of tense conversation, just try some of these strategies. Try one, and maybe it's keeping your emotions in check. Maybe it's leading with better questions. Maybe it's even just knowing when to step away. But just know that small changes in the way that you approach confrontation can completely shift the outcome. So I hope that this episode was meaningful for you and that it made a difference in your leadership and your organization. Can you do me a favor? Leave a rating and review for this podcast. It helped me out and help others to be able to see this show in their feed. But until next time, have a great life. Well, there you have it. I hope that this episode was meaningful and edifying for your leadership and your growth within your ministry and organization. Could you do me a favor? Could you leave a rating and review for this podcast? It'd really help me out and help others be able to see this show in their feed. You can also visit homerhargrove.com to be able to learn more, connect, or become one of our supporters. Until next time, have a great life.